You ready, Paul?
Yeah, we're going.
Okay, well, first of all, let me say welcome everybody, and welcome to the Attorney General Keith Ellison. I'm so delighted you are here. And thank you to Magers and Quinn. So here we go. Welcome to this edition of Black Market Reads. I'm your host, Lissa Jones. Today, we're on location at Magers and Quinn Independent Booksellers with Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, author of Break the Wheel, Ending the Cycle of Police Violence. It's going to be a powerful conversation. So please help me welcome our one and only Minnesota's Attorney General, Keith Ellison.
Such an honor to be here. I love this bookstore. I love books. I love reading. And I love talking about ideas at a moment like this.
Well, let's talk about it. First, would you give us a reading?
Sure.
Okay.
Y'all ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Shortly after Governor Walz assigned me the case in June 2020, I was in Detroit visiting my 94-year-old father, Leonard Ellison, and my two older brothers, Leonard Jr. and Brian. Brian is an ordained minister and a pastor. He picked me up from the airport, and as we often do, stopped for a little lunch at the Big Boy, a local chain in Michigan.
Oh, yeah.
After we made small talk with the hostess, a teenager wearing a COVID mask with rhinestones on it, Brian asked me to tell him what I could about the case. There was a lot I couldn't share, but there were some things that I could. As we were sitting there in this booth of this restaurant, Brian held his chin, contemplating something. He said, "You say none of them knew him, huh?" Referring to the witnesses and Mr. Floyd. "Nope, none of them knew him," I said, munching on French fries. "So why did they start yelling at the cops for him to stop?" Brian asked. "They thought it was the right thing to do, I guess," I said. "So they stepped forward to protest what was happening to someone they didn't know, someone they could have assumed the worst about. And they took video of the cops as the cops were on top of him like that?" "Yeah." "Wow. They could have been arrested or beaten themselves." "I suppose, yeah. Some cops still might retaliate. Ain't heard of, you know." "Yeah, true." Then Brian said, "It's a modern reenactment of the story of the Good Samaritan." I paused. "What are you talking about, Rev?" "You can't understand the story of the Good Samaritan," Preacher Brian said, "unless you understand that Jews and Samaritans considered each other heretics at the time. Both groups recognized Abraham as their father. They had different beliefs, which led to conflict, including violence, destruction of holy sites, and more." Brian went on. "You can't understand the story without understanding that the injured man on the roadside and the Samaritan were in conflicting groups." I started to pick up what Reverend Brian was laying down. He went on. "So as you know, a Samaritan saw an injured man lying on the roadside. Two men walked past the injured man, one man a priest and another a Levite, both learned, moral men, trained in religion and law. Neither one of them helped. They had their reasons, but they didn't help. The Samaritan helped. He dressed the man's wounds, loaded him on the back of a donkey, and delivered the injured man to an inn. When he reached the inn, the Samaritan paid the innkeeper for the night and asked him to check on the injured man through the night. The Samaritan promised to reimburse the innkeeper for any extra expenses when he returned." Brian repeated his point. "What these people, these bystanders, did is the story of the Good Samaritan. George Floyd, in the eyes of some people in this world, is the other," Brian said. Brian was right about this. Not more than a few days after Floyd's death, a well-known pundit, Candace Owens, tweeted a harsh denunciation for the deceased George Floyd, which went viral. "We've turned George Floyd, a criminal drug addict, into an icon," she said. She wasn't alone. A chorus of critics illuminated Floyd's mistakes and addictions to justify what Chauvin did to him and to protect the status quo, to keep the wheel spinning. Brian went on. "In the eyes of some, He's nothing but a big black thug with a drug problem who tried to cheat the store with a fake bill. He's the ultimate other who is outside the circle of our compassion. But like the Samaritan, the bystanders never judged him. They did what they could to help him. They witnessed his martyrdom and they tried to help. Brian took another fry and thoughtfully continued. He said that Chauvin, Lane, King, and Tao were like the Levite and the priest. They had the duty, the training, and the ability to help the suffering man, but they didn't help. They caused the suffering. It was their job to protect Floyd, especially if he was on drugs, but they did nothing. Frankly, they did worse than nothing. Yeah, I see your point, I said to Brian. The Samaritan didn't ask the injured man whether he had a criminal record or whether he had been drinking alcohol or taking dope. Brian took a sip of coffee. The Samaritan asked whether the injured man needed help, and that's all he needed to know. According to something called the bystander effect, Brian said, what these people did was extraordinary. The Reverend, my brother, said, that's the miracle. That's what I call an amazing spiritual event. And it happened right there on video for the world to see. I thought about it. Months after talking with Brian, but well before trial, I proposed to our prosecution team that our case was really about what the bystanders saw. I don't think I told them that Brian had sparked the idea, but I told them that the testimony of the use of force case with the officers, the police trainers, the experts, was just to confirm for the jury what the bystanders witnessed, unreasonable force. The testimony of the medical causation witnesses was really about confirming for the jury what the bystanders had witnessed too, unreasonable force substantially causing the death of George Floyd. If we prove these things, then we would prove unintentional murder in the first degree. All the prosecution had to do is convince the jurors to believe what the bystanders saw.
That was Keith Ellison, reading from his book, Break the Wheel, Ending the Cycle of Police Violence, following the murder of George Floyd. Keith, let's talk about it. What is the wheel?
The wheel is centuries-old cycle of tragic incident, protest. People go out on the street. We demand a investigative committee. We maybe study the problem. We issue recommendations, and then we do it again. The first beginning of the cycle, of course, this was not the beginning of the cycle, but the beginning of the cycle, the first investigative committee study was probably from the 1919 race riot in Chicago. After, you all know the story. So what happened is that back in those days, we were under the impression that there was such thing as black water and white water. And if you were black, you had to swim in the black part of Lake Michigan. And if you were white, you swam in the white part of Lake Michigan. A black kid, his flotation device went over to the white section. Some ruffians began to throw stuff at him, fell off the flotation, and he drowned and he died. And some other folks, African Americans, went to the police and said, did you see what they did? You have to arrest them, you have to do something. And the police turned on them and attacked them. And then there was reprisal, and then next thing you know, it's the Chicago riot of 1919. Now there's a lot of folks who will tell you, well, it had a lot to do with black people coming up north from the south, working in the meat packing plants, job competition. There's a whole lot of stuff. But that was the 1919 reality. That resulted in an investigative committee. But then there was another investigative committee in 1935 in Harlem, another one in 1943 in Harlem again. There was another one in Detroit in 1943, all sparked by police violence against black people. And then there was, of course, the Kerner Commission, which is within the memory of some folks probably sitting here, where they studied over 2,000 tragic events which sparked between police and African Americans who were, out there, and that resulted in civil unrest throughout the country. And we write this big report on that in the Kerner Commission. You could probably buy it in this bookstore. But then it didn't stop there. Next thing you know, You have the Rodney King. There was a Christopher Commission report, and then they studied, in L.A. And then you had the one that occurred. Even Obama had 21st century policing, and after the eruption in Ferguson. So the wheel is this wash, rinse, repeat thing that we do in America. And I'll just say this, look, there's a lot of ways to maintain a vertical hierarchy. You can use the housing system and say, you people can't live here, you people can live there. Use the education system. We're gonna corral all of y'all in this little area, only you live there, and we're gonna make sure the schools are not functioning. And you can use the healthcare system and say, well, we're gonna make sure that you don't have adequate, but also policing has played a role in maintaining the vertical hierarchy. Now, as I say that, I want to be clear, that's not the only role police has played. Policing really has played a very legitimate role of protecting people. I know some people don't agree with me on this, but I will tell you that as a prosecutor, rape, murder, and robbery does happen. It happens. I'm sorry. And somebody's got to find evidence to prosecute. And yet it's had this other role of maintaining this hierarchy. And sometimes we confuse the two, and the reason we don't come to any understanding is we're at cross purposes. Somebody says, well, no, police are good. I know a lot of good police. Yeah, of course you do. I also know some who treat people kind of, who maintain that vertical hierarchy, who say, get back on where you people belong. And both are happening at the same time, and we never really settle on, okay, what are we talking about now? The legitimate role, which we all, I'm gonna tell you, if you try to take police out of North Minneapolis, there were people who will object to that because it's a public service. So that's the wheel.
Wow.
Sorry about the long-windedness.
We're here to hear from you, so I'm not sorry myself, but thank you so much. Let's keep talking about the wheel, Keith. The only weapon we have is our bodies, and we need to tuck them in places so the wheels don't turn. Bayard Rustin. Why did you choose Bayard Rustin, and why did you choose that quote?
Well, one reason, I think Bayard Rustin is a man who must be admired far more than he is. There's no March on Washington without Bayard Rustin. He was a mentor to Martin Luther King. He knew a lot more about nonviolent social, activism than King did. Actually kind of taught it to him. He was kind of the mentee of A. Philip Randolph. And so he understood trade union and organizing. Really, he never got the acclaim that he deserved because he was gay. And in those days, Martin Luther King was smart enough to say, look, we do need you around because you, in fact, are brilliant. But if you get out front, they could hurt the movement by exposing your private life. So Bayard Rustin, an extremely wise person, never really got to be front and center in the civil rights movement. And there were a lot of people like that. Ella Baker was another one. There's a lot of people like that. So that's why, but what he meant when he was talking about that wheel is that the wheel of injustice. We got to stop the wheel and we got to slow it down. I don't think me and Bayard Rustin were talking about different things. I think we should break the wheel. He said we should stop the wheel, but the wheel of injustice cannot continue to grind on. So that's what we're talking about.
Thank you. Dr. King said riots are the language of the unheard. And you saw riots at 7 years old, and you saw riots at however old you were at the time.
58.
Okay.
I turned 60 last August.
Ah, happy birthday, King.
Yeah.
So did it feel like something came back, something that you felt in 1967 came back in the murder of George Floyd and the riots that happened as a result?
Lissa, really what is on my mind about that particular piece is that 9-year-old Judea Reynolds, who was wearing a love t-shirt as she witnessed this tragic incident, will never forget it. She was 9. Maybe one day she'll be 19, maybe she'll be 29, maybe she'll be a mom at 39. And she will drive by that corner and she will tell her children, when I was 9, this is what I saw. And I know she's gonna remember it because I remember the Detroit riots when I was about 4. I didn't know what a riot really was. I was looking out the window and I saw military vehicles going by, and we didn't live in the riot zone. We lived miles from it, but my father was, treating patients who were suffering in the riot. My father was a physician, still alive, 95 years old. And he would come home dog tired. And so I knew this was going on, and I knew that my mother was afraid. Children always know when mom's afraid, you better be afraid because there's something bad going on. And so the reason I share that, Lissa, is because that visceral reaction that I had at that young age, all of our kids went through during the summer of 2020. This whole neighborhoods locked down, boarded up buildings, things covering up the glass. People were freaked out. They didn't know what to do. And there was a run on firearms. Did you know that? Mm-hmm. It's a good business to be in. If that's, just straight commerce is what you're into. And I'll never forget that moment. And so, I view all this at the age of 58. And, it tells me that, yes, our country has made important progress. It really has. And to say it hasn't is saying that John Lewis's life didn't matter. And to say it, but at the same time, we have not broken that wheel yet. But I think we can. And there's just a few things we got to do.
I'm going to ask you about that in just a minute. Beforehand, Keith, I've known you a long time, and I've watched you evolve and change in so many beautiful ways. And I wonder, do you ever think why you? Why did the universe choose you to bend the arc of the moral universe closer to justice? It shows you, my friend.
Well, honestly, Lissa, I think it chooses us all. We're all called to do better. One thing's for sure, that the protests that you saw in 2020 were probably more multicultural than we've seen them in the past. Now, don't get me wrong, there were white people marching with King, no question. Viola Liuzzo lost her life driving black voters to the polls in Alabama. Reverend Reeb killed by ruffians when he came down from Boston to march with King. And yes, the majority of the people marching were black people, but there was always an element of multiculturalism to our protests. Even in the anti-slavery movement, there were. But this one, wow, it was truly multicultural. This is people of all colors, cultures, and faiths saying that we believe our country can do better than it's delivering right here, right now. So the business person was being called saying, how come we don't got no black salespeople here? The corporate America was saying, we don't have any African Americans on our board. People, we're in Hollywood are saying, we got folks in front of the camera, but we don't have any on the other side. What about our writers? And we actually had a moment where we all started thinking, maybe we have not been as inclusive of a society as we can be or should be, or thought we would be back in 1968. We imagined that 2023 or 2020 would be different than it is now. And so but I come from a family where we talk about calling. I come from I wish y'all would have been able to meet my mom. She died in March 2020, COVID. And, I do appreciate your sympathy, and I will tell you this though, I don't feel sad at all, because my mom poured every single thing she could into us, and there was nothing else left, right? Mm-hmm. So what you said a month, 2 months, 3 months, 3 years, all you remember is the wisdom that mom left you with. You know what I mean? And you try to be the kind of man that she raised you to be. And so, she was one who would make calls. What are you called here for? What do you want to be? What do you want to do? Her dad, my grandfather, Frank Martinez was organizing black voters in Natchitoches Parish, Louisiana in the early 1950s. And friend, they will murder you for that.
Yes, they will.
And threatened to murder him so much that my mom had to leave Natchitoches Parish and go to Lafayette, Louisiana to go to boarding school because they threatened to blow up the house so much. They burned across from the house. They wouldn't sell him gasoline. Imagine, because you're trying to say, well, maybe we could vote too. No, if you try that, we will boycott you and you will not be able to sell gasoline. It's impossible for us to even imagine it. But let me tell you, it happened. And it wasn't that long ago. And it wasn't that far away. So I come from a people who, my family's like, what are you called for? What are you here to do? There's a lot of talk about purpose. I was raised like that. Yeah.
I'll just say thank you. The verdicts, Keith.
Oh,
Will
yeah.
you read to us?
Oh yeah, what page is that one?
Uh-oh. Now you got me. You call it page numbers, okay? Here we go. I have
think I might have found
262.
it. Oh yeah, good.
You have 262? But you can read any place you want on that one.
Okay. So I'm going to start. We were all the last closing argument is made. Jerry Blackwell gets up in front of the whole wide world and says, friends, much has been made about whether George Floyd's heart was enlarged, whether it was too big.
Oh, yeah.
But the real question here, and the real fact, is that Derek Chauvin's heart was too small. And everybody was like, and when we rehearsed that, because we did, he had it in the middle. I said, man, that's the mic drop call.
There you go.
You got to put that at the back. You got to leave him with that. So he did. So we get up, we go, we leave, we come back, and that morning I couldn't figure out what to do with myself. So I just put on my suit and went down to the courthouse and waited in our little room. And I'm on a Zoom call talking about some detail. And I start right here. We discussed 3 statements. 1, if we lost on all counts. Another, if we split verdicts. And 1, if we convicted the defendants on all counts. We didn't know. As much as everyone was telling me about the obvious guilt of Chauvin, we didn't know what the outcome would be. We saw the trial in the beating of Rodney King in 1991, and we saw the jury's verdict of not guilty. In 2018, we saw the not guilty verdict in the killing of Philando Castile, an elementary lunchroom supervisor whose murder was streamed on Facebook. History was on Chauvin's side. We went over the statements and we talked back and forth about what to add and what to cut. Our media team was on the call along with Lola Velasquez Agaloo, Steve Slisher, and John Stiles. After about an hour or so, I got up from my seat and I walked in the hall to get coffee. I read it to James Ryerson, the case agent from the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, and James said, "Did you hear?" Hear what? James said, "I got friends across the country saying the verdict is in." No, it ain't. They would call us first. That's when I started seeing signs. Security personnel were kind of scurrying about. Maybe the verdicts were in. It was only Tuesday, April 20th, 2021, and the jury had gone out late the evening before. I phoned 2 law enforcement friends who I thought might know. I reached one and left a message for the second to call me ASAP. First guy. "Yes, Mr. AG, this is the information we have. The verdict is in." Of course, I hadn't heard a word from official sources, but I wasn't surprised. Judge Cahill made it very clear that he wasn't doing anyone, least of all the state, any favors. However, my friend was sure that the verdict was in. As we were still on the Zoom call, I texted Lola Velasquez on her cell phone. Better start coming down. Be there in 15. Is that gonna be okay? I wrote back, awesome, drive safely. Lola was one of the big brains behind our case, including her amazing work on our medical case. Then I texted Steve Slisher, our leader on the use of force case. He acknowledged and started moving toward the government center, where in a few minutes the jury would let us know what they thought. Then the court's clerk called. It was official. Our team was assembled and we were ready to go. Everybody was nervous, tense. We all made small talk and guesses about what the quick verdict meant. But no one really knew. We hoped, but we didn't know. The case agent from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, James Ryerson, was on hand. He knew the case better than anyone as the lead investigator. Even he threw on a tie, not his normal attire. So many of the cases of police violence against Black people have ended with acquittals or no charges at all. Breonna Taylor, Mike Brown, and Eric Garner's cases never made it past the grand jury. I reminded the team that they did a great job getting the case to the jury. No matter what the outcome, I was proud of them. The verdict in the case on the assault of Rodney King made a lifelong imprint on me, ending in an acquittal of all the police officers who savagely bludgeoned him on video. No, history was on Derek Chauvin's side. Matt Frank said, "It's about that time," and we headed down. My heart began to palpably beat in my chest. With every step I took, I came closer to the outcome of this trial, which all had begun last Memorial Day when George Floyd begged for his life and met his final end under the knee of Derek Chauvin. As we boarded the elevator and pressed the button for the 18th floor, I wasn't sure I was eager to receive the news. Would the family of George Floyd receive vindication? Would another African American person be denied justice? Step by step, we made our way to the courtroom. More than 23 million people were watching and waiting for the verdict to be announced on live television in only a few minutes. Strangely, the courtroom was pretty much the same way we had left it the day before. All outfitted with plexiglass and everything. Everyone separated from everyone else. We sat. We made small talk. We looked at our watches. We waited for what seemed like an hour, but it was less than half that. My heart, I could feel it beating in my chest. I could hear it when suddenly the court's clerk walked in, and then the court's deputy, and then all the jurors. They all filed in, one by one. We all stood, solemn and attentive. There was Derek Chauvin standing straight up like a rod, and his two lawyers, Eric Nelson and Amy Voss, a young woman with a law degree who Eric never let utter a word in open court. I couldn't tell what emotion was registering with Chauvin. I assume it was fear. Eric Nelson was by his side. The four lawyers for the state were me, Matt Frank, Steve Slisher, and Jerry Blackwell. We stood next to one another in two rows, me and Jerry up front, Matt and Steve behind us. If any one of them knew what was about to happen, they never let on. Judge Cahill entered the room, stone-faced and impassive, not his usual look. He was usually very expressive. He smiled broadly and maybe even laughed, or he scowled and occasionally yelled. He wasn't a stoic by any means. Judge Cahill opened the envelope. The courtroom was silent. He announced that he would read the verdict, and then the words came fast. Count 1, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony. Guilty. Count 2, third-degree murder, perpetuating an imminently dangerous act. Guilty. Count 3, second-degree manslaughter, culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk. Guilty. When I heard Judge Cahill read the verdicts, there was something surreal about it. I felt a rush of relief. I looked at Jerry and we shared a fist bump. I looked over at Steve and he seemed to be suppressing a smile. I don't know. Matt asked the court to revoke Chauvin's bail and order him into custody. He was no longer innocent until proven guilty. He was just guilty.
That was Keith Ellison reading from his book Break the Wheel, Ending the Cycle of Police Violence. You're listening to Black Market Reads, and I'm your host, Lissa Jones. Thank you, Keith. You know, one of the things that I'm sort of inspired by is this idea of, like Charles Hamilton Houston, who came up with the Brown versus the Board of Education desegregation case. Most people don't know that was a class action lawsuit with many, many cases.
Yep.
Your case included more than one case, a use
Yep.
of violence case or use of force case and a medical case. How did you come up with that?
Well, so in order to prove any legal case, you have to prove causation, medical causation. And the use of force case, you should know that there's this case that I'd love all of y'all to learn more about. It's called the Graham versus Connor case. The Graham versus Connor case is actually quite an interesting case. It happened in North Carolina. The Supreme Court decided it in 1989, but it started before that. It happened because a man, as you might guess, black man, was a type 1 diabetic having an episode. And he and a friend drove to a store, and he goes into the store, and he sees a line, and he grabs his orange juice, and he stands in the line for a second, but then he says, I cannot wait in this line. And then he puts the orange juice on the counter and he walks out. A police officer saw him go in and come out. And therefore, followed the car and stopped him and arrested him. One thing you should know about people who are having a diabetic episode, it does affect cognition. And so he gets out of the car and he's walking around the car. Kind of like, because he's having a diabetic episode. And so the officer grabs him, shoves him, breaks his foot, says, you ain't nothing but a damn drunk, you ain't no damn diabetic, all this abusive stuff, throws him in the back of the squad. Then the store shows up and says, we didn't lose anything, nothing was stolen. He says, oh. Takes him back to his house, throws him out like he's garbage. He shows up to the, after he heals, he goes to a lawyer and he says, look, they just beat me for nothing. And the lawyer says, yeah, he has a trial. The trial is by a arch segregationist, and his case ends up in a dismissal. And then he appeals the case, and it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And they switch the legal standard from having to prove maliciousness, which is proving what somebody's thinking, to just objective reasonableness, which in 1989 we thought was a good thing. And so that's the standard. If you prosecute a police officer, the officer has as an affirmative defense. So like for you folks who are not lawyers, here's an affirmative defense. Truth in a defamation case. If I say that you're whatever, and you say it was true, then my case is defeated. Follow me? Now it's an affirmative defense if the officer acted reasonably, but from the perspective of a reasonable officer without the benefit of hindsight. So you have to look at what did the officer know at the time it was happening, and was that conduct reasonable? And that's why a lot of times you'll say, well, I thought the guy was reaching for a gun. And you'll hear language like that because what they're saying is, I acted reasonably. That's ultimately what they're saying. So we needed a use of force expert who would say, kneeling on top of somebody who's handcuffed behind their back, pressing their chest into the concrete, after they're unresponsive, after they have no pulse, is unreasonable. Now you might think, well, what do you need an expert to tell somebody that for? Well, we needed one. And Steve ran the use of force case. And then the medical case, because one of the things we're going to say is, well, what happened was really sad, but a tragedy is not a crime. That was one of their themes. Tragedy's not a crime. It's tragic, it's sad. We're sad, everybody's sad it happened, it shouldn't happen, but it's not a crime because George Floyd died from drug overdose, or he died from an enlarged heart, or he died because he had a ganglion cyst, or he died, but anything but what we just saw over the last 10 minutes, and we got, and I will be very candid with you, my fellow Minnesotans. Our medical examiner really was not bad for us, but he wasn't that good for us either. Why? Part of it has to do with being a medical examiner. They can tell you cause of death based on what's in the tissues, what's under a slide. That's what they can do. They don't know what happened before, they don't know what happened after, and yet the medical examiner made some unfortunate comments like, well, if we'd have found this person dead like this in their own home, we might have thought it was an OD. I'm like, but you found him under Derek Chauvin's knee, though. Does that matter? So we literally had to sequentially reject all of the red herrings. So we also got the medical examiner to say, well, look, you're limited in your scope of your expertise. Would a pulmonologist know more than you? He said yes. So we got one. And the pulmonologist literally wrote the book on pulmonology. Dr. Tobin had a big, fat 10-inch book with his name on it, Pulmonology. Every medical student in America read Tobin's book on pulmonology. I'm like, is this good enough for you? So, Doctor, you might remember his Irish accent, He was a master up there. And then we got a cardiologist. And the cardiologist, Dr. Katz, said, actually, yeah, he did have some occlusion in his, he had some stenosis, meaning that, the arteries were narrowing. But you know what? But the heart is a dynamic organ, and there are it'll create pathways. And he said, actually, George Floyd's heart was pretty strong. He was playing basketball earlier in the day. So he said, if I see somebody with a heart presenting like this level of stenosis, I'm not that worried about it. We might get them on the right medication, but we're not like, oh my God, you got to be in the ER right away. So then we got an ER doc because there was all this stuff about delirium. Excited delirium. Thank you. I don't know how I could forget that word. Excited delirium. Right. That's right. But our doctor who said, so it's interesting. Here's an interesting point. The doc we got said, I do believe in excited delirium, but George Floyd is neither excited or delirious. Because George Floyd, they said, what is your name? He said, George Floyd. Spell it George Floyd, Floyd, and gave it. What is your birthday? That's not delirious, and nor was he excited. So the thing is, George Floyd didn't. We rejected that one. So and then we got our own medical examiner who we got to explain, a doctor named Lindsay Thomas, a really beautiful, wonderful person. She explained, the larger picture. And then we got the Hennepin County medical examiner who didn't want to, who said what he had to say, which is that George Floyd died as a result of subdual and restraint, and his heart gave out because it couldn't hold him, because it couldn't manage all that, he died of cardiac arrest. Now, saying someone died of cardiac arrest is like saying they died because they died. There's no one who's ever survived cardiac arrest. All people who are dead have cardiac arrest.
Oh, I see.
So, but that's what we had to do. We knew that there was no link in the prosecutorial chain that could be weak, because that was where they were going to go.
This is really incredible, and I need to give the audience a time to ask questions, but I need to ask you one thing before we go. Where should we tuck ourselves, Keith, in the wheel to make it stop?
Well, the first thing that we need the community to do is to believe in good police. Why do I say that? You don't have to tolerate low standards in policing. You don't. You don't have to say, well, unless we let Derek Chauvin run around and do what he does, then we're not gonna be safe. Not true. My firm belief is that people who want to do policing actually don't benefit from having Derek Chauvin running around. But Derek Chauvin had 18 prior excessive force complaints. He was not in the top 10 in the Minneapolis Police Department. Did you hear what I said? He was not top 10. We have a system of impunity where if you beat up the right person, nobody cares. Now, let me tell you, and I got a lot of friends. Look, I've been doing this for a long time. I got a lot of friends who believe that the police are inherently racist, can never be reformed. My point is, that's a very simplistic view of what's going on. What you have is an organization, and you have some people who are there to do their jobs, some there to just get along and get a pension, and some there because they are racist and bullies. And if you don't have high standards, the racists and the bullies will take over. And if you do have high standards, good, solid, humane law enforcement will take over. It is not bad to prosecute criminal conduct because that's the way you get less of it. And it's not bad to fire people who don't need to be in that job because the ones who are there to do the job right will be like, yeah, well, that's good. Awesome. What do you do with Madeira Arredondo, an officer who's there to do his job? What about Katie Blackwell? Y'all remember her? White woman, trainer. She's like, we do not train that. That is wrong. I am against that. I mean, we had a lot. There are people in the Minneapolis Police Department who want to do policing right. But if doing right and doing wrong gets you the same outcome, see what I'm saying? So the head of the police union, not now, but the former one, Bob Kroll, somebody said, how dare you call him a racist? Now let me just tell you this. I said, you know what? Here's why. Because when I was a brand new congressman in an all cop meeting, only cops there, nobody else, he says the people of Minneapolis are pretty dumb. We're at war with the terrorists and they just elected one to the Congress.
What?
A woman in the back, and I know her name, and I'll tell it to you if you want to hear it, says, are you saying that Congressman Ellison is a terrorist because of his religion? He says, well, he is one of them. One of them. And then he says, well, if I said it, I didn't mean it. If I said it, I was taken out of context. I didn't say it at all. And then there's an investigation. And Chief Dolan, if you remember him, has to say, well, Congressman Ellison, we've done an investigation, and I think the facts show that you are entitled to an apology. Now, some folks who are trying to both sides everything, you ever met folks who are like, nothing's wrong, everybody has a good point. No, some people are wrong. Please do not liberal yourself to the point where there's no right and no wrong. You know, some people are wrong. 2 plus 2 is not 19. It's not. And so when I'm not hurling nasty words at him, I'm describing his attitude and conduct. If you get rid of a guy like that, what good does it do for everybody there who was there, who just wants to help victims on their worst day? What does it mean? Think about what police officers do. When women are raped, an officer is there taking that statement. You're either going to have a compassionate person who cares or somebody who doesn't. When a person is shot down and killed, it's a police officer who's trying to help that family through that hard moment. They're either going to be compassionate or they're not. What I'm saying is, there are human beings who can do this job right. Don't just say, well, we just got to accept the ones who won't do the job right. Now, I'm not, so now I have friends who say, well, Keith, policing started in South Carolina, it was a slave patrols, and they're right. But just because it was that way doesn't mean it has to stay that way. I was born weighing 8 pounds. I weigh a little more than that now. You can change society. Don't you remember when it would be nothing at all for somebody to blaze up a cigarette in a room like this? We don't do that anymore. And we'd all joke and laugh if somebody drank too much. Now it's like, wait a minute, that ain't cool. As a matter of fact, give me your keys. Yeah. Societies can change. We're not stuck with the past. We can't say it didn't happen, but we can't say we're stuck. But we're also not locked into that moment now. And what I'm saying is, if we prosecute criminal conduct and we use administrative remedies to discipline rule violations, and we're consistent, we will be in the beginning of having a department that is truly there to protect and serve. But what we cannot do is say, well, as long as you beat the crap out of those people who live in that neighborhood, you can't do that. One, it spills over. It absolutely spills over. What I would say that, Justine Rushtek was not who we think of as a victim of police brutality. But when you have an out of control group of people, who don't have to abide by rules, then it spills over. I'm saying that high standards are not anti-police. They are pro-police. They're pro-police who want to do the job right. If we will enforce that. But, it's really ultimately up to us. It's up to us. And we're making strides in the right direction. Let me tell you, the post board, police officers standing the training board, it used to be that unless you are convicted, then there could be no action against your license as a police officer. Now, we're like, well, we don't care whether you're convicted or not. Did you do the conduct being complained about? So let's just say you got an officer who assaults his spouse. It used to be, unless he's convicted, no action. Now it's like, did you do it? Because if you did, you're not going to be a police officer around here. And that is at least what we're hoping happens. Mm-hmm. This will not hurt the police department. It will help it. Everybody who remains will be ready to do their job right, and there are plenty of them. And so I think I've gone on a little longer than I wanted to on this point, but I mean, that's what I think. And so then some of you might be thinking, well, what about training, Keith? Well, sure, training's good, but if you don't get a good group to start with, training doesn't help very much. Here's what I mean. If you get, let's say, Bob Kroll, and you tell him we're going to do racial sensitivity training, and you got to go, he's going to sit in the back, play Candy Crush all day, and then get his credit. You got to have somebody who wants to learn that, who's got a mind to learn. We've got to say, look, police are not warriors, they are guardians. They're not warriors, they're guardians. They're to protect and serve. They're not to, you got this killology guy. Y'all heard of this guy? Mm-hmm. There's this guy who writes books, one of them's called Killology. And he's like, you got to train police to be ready to kill. I'm like, you know what? They don't even train soldiers that way. You cannot just, my son was in was active duty military for 5 years. He said the stuff that I saw that they did to George Floyd, I would be brought up on if I did that as a soldier in the United States Army in Afghanistan. I couldn't get away with that. We have rules of engagement, and you better follow them. And so what we've got to do is we've got to just remember that, look, we have not been a multiracial democracy for very long. To be quite honest with you, we really didn't have multiracial democracy till about 1968. Before that, we had white supremacy. Yeah. Now we said we're going to have multiracial democracy. I think we still really got to embrace the fact that we got to get used to it. And what multiracial democracy means is that everybody gets a shot, right? Everybody gets a chance. Everybody is entitled to respect. We can do this. We just got to commit ourselves to it and remember that high standards are what we're asking for. Not anti-cop. In fact, it's pro-cop. And if you don't believe me, ask Madeira Arredondo. Ask Katie Blackwell.
That is the wisdom of Keith Ellison, teaching us from his book, Break the Wheel, Ending the Cycle of Police Violence. This is Black Market Reads, and I'm your host, Lissa Jones. Until next time, a luta continua, the struggle continues. May we now give a round of applause to our Minnesota's own Attorney General.
Thank you all.
He had so many pearls to drop that you better get your questions in while he's signing your book right up there. Attorney General Ellison, if you would be so careful to please make your way that way. The lovely people want you to sign your book.
Okay.
You can do a few questions.
There's
You can do a
hands
few
up.
questions.
Oh, we can do,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, you're good.
They changed the agenda.
You're good.
Thank you. Okay, Attorney General, please.
Y'all doing good in here, didn't you?
Loosey-goosey here.
Oh, thanks a lot. How you doing?
Great, I'm so glad that you're here and I've always voted for you.
Thanks a lot.
I
You know, we didn't talk about the election, but maybe we should.
I just want to ask, and I don't know if you have a definitive answer to this, but how was Bob Kroll able to stay in office for as long as he did, and how was Derek Chauvin, after 18 or 19 disciplinary actions, how were they allowed to stay in office?
You know, I would say that in the international community, it is described as impunity. It is a set of circumstances where something might be technically illegal, but we just sort of allow it to happen.
But that many times?
Yes.
If your policy is impunity, here's what happens if your policy is impunity. People file complaints, we get to them when we can. If they don't really make a big deal, maybe it gets lost. You know, they would just slow walk it. And no, you know, so that's a impunity. So, you know, this was a problem in the area of domestic violence for many years. It used to be that if there was a domestic violence call, the police would show up and tell the man, you know, you're excited, you're angry, just take a walk around the corner, you know, just cool down, you know. That used to be the way we dealt with it. That was impunity. That was saying, you can do this, but you're just going overboard. But it's illegal technically, but, you know, between us guys, you know, just cool out. This is called impunity. It is a legal description of unenforcement of laws because the social norms condone the conduct. Does that make sense?
It does, but 18?
Remember, he said he's not even in the top 10.
Not top 10.
So he's not even in the top 10 of.
There are people who got way more. But I don't think Minnesotans know that. I think they'd be shocked to know it, which is why I often cite that statistic. If you read,
I didn't understand. I thought you were saying he wasn't one of the, in an ironic way, saying he wasn't in the top 10 officers of Minneapolis.
No, explain what you're saying, Keith.
okay, boy, I thought y'all understood what I was saying. If you were to rank the officer with the most complaints to the one with the least complaints, his 18 does not get him into the top 10. Is that clear now?
Yeah.
I'm sorry for being confusing about that. But what I mean is that there are many people who have way more complaints than him.
And what about Bob Kroll? Why couldn't they?
Bob Kroll has like 27 and he was on the radio bragging about it.
Right.
Well,
The union? Did the union?
So we got several people.
well, let me just real quick with this. So I'm gonna tell you all a very quick story. 2 Minneapolis police officers going into the Vikings Green Bay game. They're in Green Bay. They're starting fights. They're drunk. They're disorderly. They're out of control. They get arrested, and they say, "Hey, we're fellow cops." And the Green Bay cops say, "So, you're acting up." So they arrested them. On the camera, they're walking in, and they say, "Oh man, we're in trouble now," and they use an expletive for a woman who is attracted to women in reference to Chief Harto. It wasn't a nice expletive. It's a word all of y'all know, but I will not dignify with the use of it here. And they say, oh, that so-and-so, she's gonna break our, male anatomy, blah, 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 blah. Right? On tape. Harto says, you're out. Delmonico, the head of the union, says, what do you want from me? You're on tape calling the chief that. You gotta go. He runs for president of the police union and says, Delmonico didn't stand up for our boys. And he wins the election for president of the union. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, it's impunity. It's an attitude that our social norms say that we condone this conduct even though it is technically illegal. Sorry to take so long.
No, you did.
Y'all need to know that story. It's true.
It's really important.
If somebody says, oh, Keith is making up stuff, look it up yourself.
Well, and there's still folks that are continuing that trend, including our city attorney, who's actively against an entity that's trying to sue the city for disciplinary records that are relegated to coaching, which nobody has any visibility to. And Cheryl Schmidt, who's now in the Police Federation, was Kroll's right-hand woman. So I don't know how we can find belief that there are folks that can do this job honorably when we have so many folks in power that are standing up for the folks that don't. There's a question in there somewhere. I don't know.
I might have the question, actually.
Yeah, well, here's all I'll say, is that when Martin Luther King started marching in 1955, he had no objective reason to believe that he could end segregation. Every single historical precedent indicated this is this way, it's always gonna be this way, it's never not gonna be any other way. And yet they marched and they won. And then in 2013, there was a case that struck down the Voting Rights Act. So what does that mean? We quit? Of course not. We keep on demanding better. And one day we're gonna get it.
Lissa, you call the next question.
Thank you. Here, please. And thank you, Keith.
Thank you. I, kind of piggybacking off of the last comment, I was wondering if you have any concrete advice for citizens. We know that there are data management systems that can help departments assess officers that may present a greater threat to the public. We know we've seen success in the city with the non-emergency response team, but how do those of us who are not in political power, except for our votes, what are our greatest tools? What are the things that we may not be thinking of that can help us leverage the power that we do have to demand those changes that we know could exist, that we don't even have to ask for a study. We know that there are concrete changes that could be made tomorrow if the will existed. How do we help push for those?
This is a wonderful question. Activism, I could name a few things, but I'd say you got to write. You need to persuade you need to write in the popular press. You need to start a podcast. You need to convene people of like mind. You need to find friends in places you may not think you have them, but you actually do. You got to organize, but I'm telling you that, look, elected people are not the most powerful people. The most powerful people are you guys. I can't do nothing without your help. If I tried to, I wouldn't be in office no more. You could run for office. That's something I recommend people doing. Even if you don't win, you can say, I'm going to hammer on this point, and they are going to hear from me on this. I'm saying that, I wouldn't even have had, talk about this case, I wouldn't have had this case if masses of people wouldn't have went out into the streets and then demanded it. Right? So what I'm saying is the most powerful person is not the elected person. It's the person who can move the people. Now I know it feels like, well, Keith, what are you telling you you're not powerful? I saw you on TV the other day. You were on Almanac and blah, blah, blah. No, I'm just saying that I am here, I am doing everything I'm doing at the permission and the sufferance of you. And if I don't do what you want, I'm not in office anymore. And so that's kind of, so the thing is, and you know, I mean, I keep on referencing King because everybody, that's something we all share and we all know. Never held a political office. Never held political office. Rosa Parks never held political office. Baird Russell never held political office.
No, we didn't.
The most powerful people don't hold political office.
They organize.
Yeah. So you know this. I'm just saying that I know it seems long and it seems slow and it almost seems impossible. But if you keep on pounding it, it's going to work. I promise.
Attorney General Keith Ellison, thank you.
Can we just get that one guy right there?
I'm getting all kind of conflicting.
I know.
My comment question is about this conversation about the police union, because I think we're letting one of the parties to collective bargaining off the hook. There's no contract that the political leadership and administrative leadership of this city has not agreed to. And I feel like they are getting let off the hook for their role in what has happened with the union and a lot of other things.
Well, let me just tell you, I think that you are making a very valid point, and I think we need to figure out what is contract negotiation time, and next time we need to organize and make a big deal about it. And we need to say, look, you know, I mean, in Minneapolis, I mean, it's a union town, right? So if you want to help officers get a good pension, get decent pay, health and benefits, fine. But they cannot tell the people of Minneapolis how to conduct policing. It's civilian authority which must control how we do this, right? I really do believe that law enforcement organizations, should not wield lots of political power, because if they do, they'll make decisions that benefit them, not necessarily everyone else. And so, quite honestly, I mean, there are a lot of cases where the chief, and not just in Minneapolis, but in say, Richfield and other places, fired people. You may not be on my force anymore because you are not fit, and the union put them right back on through the arbitration process. So what if you said, look, the police chief is the one who decides discipline. If you got out of control officers, we're gonna hold you responsible, and you're not gonna be able to hide behind nameless, faceless arbitrator, right? Now, you know, so these are the kind of ideas we need, right? Because at the end of the day, if you just look at the way, I mean, look, I'm not saying Europe is some kind of nirvana, but they don't have these kind of problems. They don't. Talk to your cousin who visited London or something. They don't have these kind of, they have them sometimes, occasionally. Not, you know, there was the mess in France this last summer. But what I'm saying is, they're using their police to sort of maintain, you know, Frenchness versus the people who are coming from the colonies, right? That's what's going on in France. So what I'm saying to you is that there's a lot of countries where these problems simply don't happen. We don't have to put up with this. We can change it. It's not anti-police. In fact, it's pro-police for the people who want to do the job. But one thing we cannot do is keep on asking for better, you know, and we got to be smart around contract negotiations. Say this thing needs to change. And I'm telling you this, I know there's officers who might say, yeah, I think you're right. I've met him. We got to wrap up, but there's a woman named Carrie L. Horn. Y'all may never have heard of Carrie L. Horn. Carrie L. Horn was a Buffalo police officer. And one day, about 18 years ago, Carrie L. Horn went into a house to arrest somebody there was probable cause that he committed a crime. And she cuffed him and she walked him back out. She noticed that her partner was still in the house. She goes back in and says, what's going on? And her partner has the guy cuffed but is banging on the guy. And she sort of intervenes to stop him and he punches her. She punched him back. But then she's like, you're gonna get it. You were abusing you were abusing a citizen. Who was confined. You hit me. You're in trouble. There was trouble already for her.
Yeah.
She got her fired. She got her pension taken away. Meanwhile, the officer who did this gets charged with a federal civil rights crime, goes to prison for what he did. Then Carrie L. Horn, through fighting the legal system, ends up getting her pension restored after 15 years.
Wow.
And then she the city council passes a law called Carrie L's Law, which is the duty to intervene if you see police wrongdoing. So that's what I say to my friends who say abolish, abolish. I'm like, there might be people who you have allyship with that you don't know. You know, if people in the department and people outside of it say, look, let's get rid of the racists and the bullies and the sexists and the nasty people, then maybe we end up with a pretty decent department after a while. That's what I believe. Maybe I'm naive, but I believe it. Anyway, thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you.